2 weeks before my wedding, my life still felt like a fairy tale that had finally chosen to be kind to me. Every ribbon, every seat, every small piece of the day had been planned with the precision of someone who believed love could be protected by order. I am Jenna Carter, 33, an interior designer who built everything I had from quiet discipline rather than luck. On that Sunday afternoon, while I was checking the final arrangements, my younger sister walked in with a look that made the air feel heavy. She sat across from me and whispered, "There's something you should know before the wedding." I waited, thinking it would be a joke, or perhaps some trivial secret between sisters. But when she said Ethan's name, my heart lost its rhythm. She confessed that it had happened once, that it was a mistake, that she was sorry. I stared at her, trying to understand which part hurt more, the betrayal itself, or the calm way she delivered it. When I told my parents, my mother said softly, "She's young, she didn't mean to hurt you." My father looked away and said nothing, as if silence could erase what he had just heard. Ethan stood near the door, his eyes fixed on the floor, offering apologies that sounded rehearsed. The room became smaller with every word spoken, and smaller still with every word left unsaid. I took off my engagement ring, placed it on the table, and walked out before anyone could follow. That night, as I sat alone in my car, I understood something I had never truly believed. Until then, betrayal does not always come from strangers. Before I tell you how I made them all regret, stay with me, because what came next was nothing anyone in my family could have imagined. The next morning, sunlight pressed through the blinds, thin and relentless, as if determined to drag me into another unwanted day. My phone rang again and again until the sound became impossible to ignore. When I finally picked up, it was Mom, her voice steady but distant, asking me to come home so we could talk things through. She said we should handle this as adults, as if betrayal could ever be solved like a scheduling mistake. I didn't want to go, but some part of me still hoped there was a place for me in that house. When I arrived, my younger sister Madison was already there. She looked fragile, sitting on the couch, surrounded by crumpled tissues. Between shallow breaths, she said, "I didn't mean to ruin your life." Her words came out rehearsed, carefully arranged to sound broken. I didn't speak. Mom sat beside her, rubbing her back, repeating that everyone makes mistakes. Dad was in his chair, pretending to read the newspaper, though the page never turned. Ethan stood in the corner, quiet, avoiding my eyes. His apology came out thin, like a script he had memorized but never believed. Mom defended him before I could say a word. "He feels terrible, Jenna. Don't make it harder for anyone." I wanted to ask who anyone meant, but the answer was already written on their faces. The entire room had decided who needed comfort and who didn't. They spoke about forgiveness and family as if those words were instructions, not choices. Madison cried again. Mom said she was too young to understand what she had done. Dad muttered, "Let's not make this worse still," using calmness to hide guilt. I realized I hadn't been invited to talk, but to surrender to fix their story by erasing my own. I stood there, the air heavy around us. "You already did," I said quietly, and every sound in the room disappeared. I went upstairs, packed a single suitcase, and pulled the door shut behind me. Madison followed halfway up the stairs, her voice trembling, asking me to wait, but I kept walking. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against my skin, but all I felt was cold. My best friend Chloe Miller came later, after I called her from a gas station near the edge of town. She didn't ask for details. She looked at me once and said, "Go. Don't wait for anyone to apologize. They never will." We loaded the last box into her car and didn't look back. I deleted every contact, every message, every picture that still connected me to them. As we drove away, the house where I grew up grew smaller in the mirror until it became just another building on the street. That night, I lay on Chloe's couch, listening to the faint hum of the city through the window. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I only listened to the silence and realized that for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. 2 months later, I saw the photos online. A notification appeared from a mutual friend's post when I had forgotten to unfollow. I clicked on it without hesitation, and for a moment, my entire body froze. There they were, Madison and Ethan, standing at the altar where I was supposed to be. It was the exact same garden I had booked with the same arch of white roses I had chosen months ago. Even the sunlight looked cruelly familiar, as if it remembered me. Madison wore a gown strikingly similar to the one I had once tried on in front of Mom. Ethan stood beside her with an easy smile, as though nothing in the world had gone wrong. The caption beneath the photo read, "A family reunited." My parents stood proudly beside them, smiling as if this was the ending everyone had hoped for. Mom wore the same dress I had bought for her when I believed she would stand by me on my wedding day. I stared at the photo until the image blurred. The comments were full of celebration, filled with words like true love and second chances. I closed my laptop and opened my banking app. The deposit for the venue, the retainer for the photographer, and the catering payment were all gone. Each transaction led to the same place. Every payment I had made was transferred to a new account under the name Mrs. Madison Brooks. My stomach turned as if the air had been knocked out of me. I called the venue manager, desperate for some kind of mistake, but they confirmed the booking had simply been updated with her name. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized that everything tied to that wedding had been erased from my life and rewritten in hers. For days, I could barely move. My apartment felt smaller with every breath, full of decorations and lists that no longer belonged to me. I finally decided to sell it. Letting go of the space that had held my plans felt painful but necessary. I found a modest house on the east side of Cleveland. It was old and uneven, the walls cracked in places, but it was quiet. It belonged entirely to me. On my first night there, the house smelled faintly of paint and wood dust, but the silence wrapped around me like something pure. I returned to my work in interior design, taking freelance projects again, one client at a time. I worked late into the night, surrounded by sketches and fabric samples, rebuilding both my income and my sense of self. Chloe visited on weekends, bringing coffee and helping me hang curtains. She told me that rebuilding didn't mean failure, that it only meant I was still moving forward. I believed her. Over time, the ache began to fade into something steadier, quieter, like acceptance. One evening, while finishing a project layout, I caught a glimpse of the reflection in my screen and saw someone I barely recognized, someone stronger. They had taken my wedding, my plans, and even my money. But they could not take my ability to start over. If Madison and Ethan could create a new beginning, so could I. 1 year later, Cleveland finally started to feel like home again. The house that once echoed with emptiness now carried the gentle rhythm of my days. Work had grown steadier, and for the first time in a long while, I felt capable rather than lost. My interior design business was still small, but it was mine, and every new client felt like proof that rebuilding was possible. One morning, I received an email from a property developer asking me to design the interior of several model homes. It was the kind of opportunity I had once dreamed about. To make it official, I needed to sign a business contract. That was how I met Daniel Hayes, a lawyer introduced by a colleague. Daniel was calm and thoughtful, the kind of person who spoke with intention rather than haste. He greeted me with an easy professionalism that never felt forced. During our first meeting, he reviewed every page of the contract, carefully pausing to explain what each clause meant instead of rushing through it. When he noticed the small silver band mark still faintly visible on my left hand, he hesitated before asking, "Do you need me to include anyone else on the contract?" I smiled slightly and said, "No, just me." He nodded, and in that quiet acknowledgement there was no pity, only respect. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed often. Daniel became more than just my legal advisor. He was someone who genuinely listened. He noticed details about people, not to judge them, but to understand. One afternoon, after a long meeting, he mentioned that I seemed distant whenever the topic of personal life came up. I told him about Madison and Ethan. My voice didn't shake, and I didn't cry. It was the first time I had said their names out loud without feeling broken. When I finished, Daniel looked at me and said, "You don't need closure from them. You already survived what they did." His words stayed with me. For the first time, I realized I had spent so long waiting for an apology that I forgot survival itself was proof of strength. Daniel never tried to fix my past. He simply reminded me that I still had a future. We started having coffee after meetings at first by coincidence, then by quiet habit. He would ask about my designs, genuinely curious about color palettes and spatial flow, and I found myself asking about his cases just to hear him talk. There was no rush between us, no forced confessions or grand gestures. Trust came softly like sunlight after a storm. By the time the project was complete, the once empty house had transformed. Plants filled the windowsills, sketches scattered across the desk, and the air smelled faintly of new beginnings. Daniel visited one evening to drop off the final contract. We stood in the kitchen laughing over something small, and he said, "You've done more than rebuild a business. You've rebuilt yourself." I didn't answer right away, but I knew he was right. That night after he left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked out over the quiet Cleveland street. The city lights shimmered like distant constellations. I thought of the woman I had been a year ago, frightened, betrayed, and adrift, and realized I no longer recognized her. I wasn't defined by what they had taken, but by what I had chosen to create afterward. For the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. 4 years had passed since I last saw them. Cleveland had given me everything I needed to rebuild quiet mornings, steady work, and the kind of peace that came from distance. Daniel and I had built a partnership rooted in trust and patience. I rarely thought about my family anymore until one afternoon when Mom called. Her voice trembled as she said she wanted to see me for dinner, that her health had been up and down. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Daniel offered to come with me. He said it wasn't about confrontation, but about closure. I wasn't sure which I needed more, but I said yes. The night of the dinner, the air felt heavy as we approached my parents' house. The same porch light flickered, the same curtains hung in the window as if nothing had changed. Inside, I heard laughter before we even reached the dining room. When I stepped in, Madison was already seated with Ethan beside her, and a little boy with bright eyes and curls. Her son Liam sat between them, playing with a toy car. Mom stood and smiled, acting as if the last 4 years had been erased. "I'm so glad you came," she said, ushering us to sit. Dad nodded but avoided my eyes. Dinner began in stiff politeness. Madison chatted about her new house, her career, and Liam's school. When she looked at me, her tone sharpened. "Some of us moved on," she said with a smile that wasn't kind. The words landed heavier than she knew, but I didn't react. Daniel reached under the table and touched my hand lightly, a quiet reminder that I didn't owe them my silence anymore. I asked Mom how she was feeling, trying to shift the subject, but she simply said, "I just wanted us to be a family again." Ethan cleared his throat, pretending to agree, and Dad finally spoke. "Let's not make this worse," he said firmly, as if I were the one who had broken something. Something inside me cracked. Years of restraint, forgiveness, and forced understanding gave way to clarity. I looked around the table, the people who had defended betrayal and called it love, and realized I didn't belong there. I said, "You wanted peace. But peace doesn't come from pretending the past didn't happen." Madison rolled her eyes, saying, "You're still bitter. We're happy now. You should try that." I turned to her and replied, "Happiness built on lies doesn't last, Madison. One day Liam will grow up and see exactly who you both are." The room went silent. Ethan's face stiffened and Dad started to protest, but Daniel spoke before he could. "She has nothing more to explain," he said calmly. "You don't invite someone to dinner just to remind them of their pain." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but even then she said, "Please don't leave angry." I stood, took Daniel's hand, and said, I'm not angry. I'm done. My voice didn't shake. I looked at each of them, at the family I once tried so hard to keep together, and ended it with the only truth left to say. You're not my family anymore. We walked out together, and the night air felt colder than before, but lighter too. Daniel didn't speak as we reached the car. He just opened the door for me, waited until I sat, then said softly, "You did what you needed to do." I nodded, staring out at the dark street where my parents' house faded in the distance. For years, I had imagined this moment with anger or tears. But now, all I felt was release. 3 weeks later, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. Every time I closed my eyes, the dinner replayed in fragments: the smug tone of Madison, the silence of my parents, Daniel's steady hand as we walked away. I opened my laptop more out of restlessness than intent and found myself on a blank page. My fingers started moving before my mind could stop them. I wrote about betrayal. Not the cinematic kind, but the one that happens at a dinner table when the people who raised you choose comfort over truth. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I wrote about how it feels when love turns into performance, when loyalty becomes a transaction. I ended it simply. Some families break you. Others show you how strong you had to be all along. When I finished, I posted it anonymously under the title, "Family Betrayal: What No One Talks About." By morning, it had thousands of views. By noon, it was everywhere, reposted, quoted, debated. People wrote that it felt like their own story. Strangers shared their own heartbreak, and somehow their words made me feel less alone. I told myself it wasn't revenge, it was truth. But truth spreads like fire. 2 days later, I received a message from Chloe. My best friend sent a link with just 3 words. "You did this." My heart dropped. The article had been shared on a local news page. Someone had connected the dots. My sister's name, Ethan's company, even my mother's charity work. Comments flooded in calling them hypocrites, cowards, manipulators. The internet did what it always does. It dug deeper than anyone asked it to. Within a week, Madison lost her position at the real estate firm where she worked. A client had recognized her from the story and pulled their business. Ethan was suspended from his finance job after a client complained about his moral image. Even Mom wasn't spared. The church committee she led quietly removed her from public activities, citing disruption to community trust. Dad tried to stay silent, but reporters had already reached his office. For the first time, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. The story that once belonged to me was now owned by everyone online. Chloe called again that night. Her voice was calm, but it cut deep. "You wanted closure, not chaos," she said. I couldn't argue. She was right. Daniel came over the next morning. He didn't scold or console. He just sat across from me and said, "Revenge never stops where you think it will." His words lingered longer than any applause from strangers ever could. I told him I hadn't planned it to go this far. He nodded and said, "No one ever does." Over the following days, my inbox filled with messages, some thanking me for my honesty, others begging me to take the post down. But the internet doesn't forget. It had a life of its own now. Each notification felt heavier than the last, a reminder that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. One evening, I opened the article again. The comments had grown into thousands. Some were compassionate, others cruel. One stood out. "Sometimes justice and revenge look the same until it's too late." I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. That night, I realized truth and revenge share the same starting point: pain. The difference lies in where you stop. I had gone too far without realizing I'd left peace behind. 1 year later, revenge didn't feel like victory anymore. Time had washed away the noise of the scandal, but what remained was heavier than silence. Madison lived alone in the same house she once flaunted as proof of her perfect life. Ethan had left months after the fallout, unable to bear the weight of public judgment. People said he moved to another state, remarried, and never looked back. Madison, however, became a ghost in her own town. Sometimes her name appeared in community whispers that she avoided neighbors that her son Liam rarely spoke in class. One afternoon, a mutual acquaintance told me Liam had been bullied at school. The other children called his mother the woman from the article. The thought of a child carrying his parents' shame stayed with me for days. I had never wanted that. A week later, I received a letter. It was from my mom. The handwriting was shaky, the kind that carries both regret and exhaustion. She wrote that she had been praying for peace within our family, that she missed me, and that she hoped I could let go of the past before it consumes you. I read those words over and over, trying to decide whether they were for my healing or hers. When I told Daniel about the letter, he listened without interrupting. After a while, he said, "Peace isn't about forgiving them, it's about freeing yourself." His words lingered in my mind long after he left that evening. I began to wonder whether revenge had ever truly freed me, or if it had only chained me to a different kind of pain. That night, I opened my laptop again. The article still existed, still gathering comments from strangers dissecting a life they didn't live. My hands hovered over the delete button. I thought about Madison, about Liam, about my parents trying to salvage what was left of their reputation. Then I thought about myself, the person I had become through anger and survival. It didn't feel like surrender when I clicked delete. It felt like air filling lungs that had been empty too long. The screen went blank, and I sat there feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no applause, no audience, no satisfaction. Just quiet. In the months that followed, life found its rhythm again. I focused on work on weekends with Daniel, on learning how to exist without bitterness shadowing every thought. Sometimes guilt still crept in, subtle but persistent. Yet every time it did, I reminded myself that guilt was not the same as regret. One binds you to the past, the other helps you move beyond it. A few months later, I passed a playground and saw a woman watching a boy from a distance. It took me a moment to recognize her. Madison looked older, smaller somehow, as if time had carved the fight out of her. Liam ran toward her with a smile, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, only empathy. I turned away before she could see me. That night, as I stood on my balcony, I thought about everything that had happened. Revenge had promised justice but delivered emptiness. Peace, on the other hand, had asked for surrender and given me back myself. They faced their consequences. I faced myself. 2 months later, I packed again, but this time for peace. The small apartment that had once been my refuge now felt like a closed chapter. I boxed my things with quiet care, labeling nothing because I didn't plan on looking back. Cleveland had become familiar in its stillness, and this time I chose a place not for safety, but for serenity, a tiny studio overlooking a quiet street where the afternoon light fell softly through the blinds. Before leaving, I wrote a letter to Daniel the lawyer who had once helped me rebuild more than just my business. I told him how deeply I appreciated his kindness and patience, but that I needed space to learn how to stand on my own. "You taught me how to rebuild," I wrote, "but now I need to learn how to live." When I sealed the envelope, I knew it wasn't an ending, just a different kind of beginning. In the new studio, I started sketching again. The walls were bare, but they felt like promise. I opened my own interior design studio, small but entirely mine. The first client was a woman who said she wanted a home that felt unburdened. As I rearranged her space, stripping away excess, letting light breathe through, I realized that's what I had been doing with my own life all along. One morning, a letter arrived without a return address. The handwriting stopped me. It was Madison's, my sister's. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. She wrote about regret, about nights she couldn't sleep, about how she understood now that forgiveness wasn't something she could ask for but only hope to deserve. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't reply. Some doors are meant to close quietly. That evening, I sat by the window and opened my journal, the same one I had carried since the day I left home. I wrote, "Justice gave me control. Peace gave me freedom." The words felt simple but final. I no longer needed anyone's apology to validate my healing. The silence no longer hurt. It just existed. As the sun sank behind the skyline, the city glowed in amber hues. Life moved on outside, children shouting, a bus passing, the hum of distant music, all reminders that the world didn't wait for pain to end before continuing. I leaned back, feeling the rhythm of peace settle inside me like something I had finally earned. I never forgave them. I just stopped needing to. Letting go is not weakness, it is the strength of someone who understands that resentment cannot nourish peace. Justice might bring control, but only acceptance brings freedom. Sometimes true closure isn't about seeing others pay for what they've done. It's about choosing to walk forward without needing to turn around. The past doesn't vanish, but its weight becomes lighter when you stop carrying it with both hands. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved or trusted, share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story, no matter how painful, holds the power to heal, not only for the one who tells it, but for someone out there who needs to know they're not alone. Your words might be their light.